Well, John Luther Adams, thank you so much for meeting with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
You're here for the New Music Festival with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. They're performing your Pulitzer Prize winning piece, Become Ocean.
Yes, they are.
Very exciting. And congratulations on your Pulitzer Prize win on that piece.
Thank you so much.
Now, tell us a little bit about Become Ocean. What was the inspiration? What made? What was the? I guess the idea behind it.
Yeah, I guess there were many ideas behind it, but at some point, if we're lucky, our ideas fall away and the music emerges and becomes itself. My work often begins with an image or an idea or maybe a title or a particular experience that I've had, work of art that I've seen and been moved by, something I've read. But those are just ways that we begin our search for the music. And if we're lucky, as the search continues, the music eventually finds us, and then we are able to sort of stand back, get out of the way, and let the music come through and be whatever it wants to be. So there were many ideas behind Become Ocean. Among them, my grave concern, which I think all of us share these days, about the melting of the polar ice and the rising of sea levels, the acidification of the oceans, and the precarious future of the human species.
So that played a huge role in the creation of this piece.
It's always in my mind, and it was very much present in my thoughts as I was working on Become Ocean. But then the music rose up and carried me and my thoughts away with it, and it just became a world of its own, which is what we hope for ultimately. The music becomes itself, becomes something that we couldn't have imagined, and something that has a presence and a force that feels like a place. I think all of my life I've been trying to compose home, trying to find music that I could inhabit. And,
so the environment in musical form, an extension.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So this piece was specifically inspired by my experience of the Pacific in Mexico, where we're now spending half of our time. And I've lived most of my adult life far from the ocean. Lived in the interior of Alaska, in the subarctic, and the ocean is the Pacific is it's a completely new place for me. It's a new world, and it's a new sound.
So this is sorry.
Yeah, this is one of the first pieces to come out of that.
So this is a new direction, one would say, because it's a different environment from the Arctic that you had lived a huge portion of your life in. And so this, even though it still deals with the environment, it's an extension of the environment in musical form. It's something new to you, the ocean.
It's new for me.
Yeah.
Whether that's audible in the music, whether my associations are audible to you. When you hear the music is really irrelevant. And in fact, my program notes are getting shorter and shorter, and more and more what I want is simply to discover a strange, a beautiful, sometimes frightening place in music, bring that into the air, and then invite you, the listener, into that place to find your own way, to have your own experience, and maybe if you're really lucky, to get lost in it.
You want to hear my response to when I first heard Become Motion?
Please.
I'm glad you mentioned that it's about the ocean and it's a new environment, because I couldn't help but sense there's a feeling of a sense of wonder, that childlike sense of enthusiasm when I heard that was fresh and new. I mean, and as a creative artist, I recognized that. I recognized hearing that you were on this wondrous journey. And now that you told me that this was a new experience in the sense that it's a new territory, that makes a lot of sense. It clarifies why I felt that way when I heard it.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. That's really beautiful, and that's what I want for myself, and it's what I want for you. So
well, absolutely, it drew me in. And not only that, when I first heard it, I had troubles, and I'll tell you why. I was going into it with the wrong ears. I was going into it with classical concert ears. You know how classical concert music, there's focused listening, there's an attention there where you follow the motifs, the melodies, how it develops and such. With this, it was different. It was almost as if I had to be unfocused to be enveloped by the sound world that was coming through me.
Yes.
And gradually, I got a sense that there was no sense of I. You know how here's a good analogy. When you're in conversation like we are, there's a focused attention, you're following one another and you're trying to keep up with one another, and there's a certain harmony. And so there's a sense of I, in the sense that there's you and there's me and we're trying to follow each other. With Become Motion, it was more like being in a room full of people talking amongst themselves, and there's that murmur. And so I felt like I was in that state. I was hearing just a general murmur and just going with the waves of how the conversation was going in that room. And so there's no sense of I, just the fabric of sound. And that's how it took me 2 listenings, but that's when it clicked.
That's great.
So
that's really beautiful. And you know, again, that's what I want. I want to be immersed in something that is bigger, deeper, more expansive than I can imagine or perhaps perceive. It's that feeling that we get when we're out in what I call the real world, what we call nature, right? And we're in the presence of something that's so much older and vaster than we can even comprehend. And for me, that's I feel small. At times, I feel afraid, but at the same time, it's an exhilarating experience to feel that you're part of this much larger thing. And I think that's close to the heart of religious experience.
The way you described your creative process, where you just try to let it flow through you, is quite contrary to how a lot of composers and artists, especially in the Western world, create, because there's a sense of I where you want to control things. Especially, I'll speak just for myself for the time being. When I compose, there's a sense where I need to control the materials I have and try to make it my own.
Yeah. I understand that. I'm a control freak too, in my own way, but I'm not interested in following a particular train of thought or telling you a story, or even painting a picture now.
Right.
It's something different.
With your piece, I felt it reminded me of a process that I explored of letting go.
Yeah.
Just letting go and it just happened recently. I tried this thing called flotation tank, sensory deprivation. Have you ever tried one of those?
No, I think I'd be afraid to. How was it?
It was amazing.
You loved it, huh?
I loved it. Of course, I went in with a lot of skepticism.
Yeah.
And not knowing what I was getting into and reading about it. And I thought, well, it's not going to do much for me, but I'll do it anyways. But you start to lose your sense of self because there's no sensory input. There's no, and all the input starts to emerge out, and you start to become you lose your sense of I, of who you are, and you become a state of pure energy.
Yes.
And then after that experience, I went back to composing, and it completely changed. I started to look at the notes, and rather than telling it what I want or looking at the long-term goal, I started to follow what it wanted to do, almost as if I was a passenger going along with where it's going.
Yes.
And that's what I recognized in Become Ocean. I felt if I was in your position composing, I felt that would be the state I would have been in.
Yes.
Letting that music just dictate its own term and me just following along. If it doesn't want to do this, fine. If it wants to go there, fine.
Absolutely.
And so that's how I recognize.
So in that sense, the music composed me. And that's much more interesting to me because there's this process of wonder and curiosity and discovery.
I completely agree.
As it emerges, you know, I think your experience in the isolation tank is pertinent. I'm claustrophobic. So
okay,
I don't
forget
think
that idea.
Yeah, and, I heard this story. I don't know if you heard this. Laurie Anderson went in one recently, and the lid got stuck. Laurie Anderson got trapped in one of these things. But so that just terrifies me.
Right.
But again, there's that razor's edge. You know, in the 19th century they called it the sublime. When you're on that razor's edge between beauty and terror. But for me, rather than going inward, I would find that experience it being a small part of a much larger thing, whether it's the tundra or the desert or the ocean. And so it's a matter of directing my attention not so much inward as outward. And this has begun to manifest itself in my work in a very physical way. I'm not sure, I don't know whether you know a piece called Inuxuit. It's so Inuxuit was the first time, for almost 40 years, I'd made music inspired by the big world, but intended to be experienced in the small world, in a concert hall or other indoor setting. Finally, in Inuxuit, it occurred to me that it was time to actually step outside and make music that was intended to be heard outdoors. And of course, what that does is when we move outside, it turns the whole experience of listening and composing inside out. If you think about it, when we're in a concert hall, we're trying to shut out the world. We enter into this consecrated space for music, and we're trying to shut out everything that's not the music and focus our attention inward on a few very carefully produced sounds that we regard as the music, and everything else would be an interruption. For instance, that's the subway train rolling underneath Carnegie Hall, right?
or the fire truck just whizzing by.
Yes. So when we go outdoors, it turns our awareness inside out. It opens things up, and rather than shutting out everything that's not the music, it becomes a matter of listening to everything around us as part of the music. So it's an outward directed attention. And of course, there's a point at which the isolation tank or the desert landscape take us to the same place, where the inward and the outward meet. But we're trying to become part of, or remember, re-experience, reimagine, and re-experience that we are part of something bigger.
You know, that raises a very good point, because now that I think about it, people, when we go to a concert hall, we're doing the exact opposite of what we normally should, and that is to embrace what's already around us.
Yes.
When we go in a concert hall, you go because you're going to, once the doors close, once those the concert hall doors close, you're in a trapped box, basically, but you're there sitting down, and you're going to submit yourself to whatever happens on stage in the hopes that it'll take you away somewhere else other than the world that you just walked into.
Which is a beautiful and useful and wonderful thing.
But what you do is that you force, I shouldn't say force, but you bring the audience to the outside and make them aware of the music that's already there.
Yes, and also, I think part of what happens when we move outdoors in a piece like Inukssuit or there's a new piece called Sila, The Breath of the World,
Right.
there is each listener is an active participant who has a unique experience of her own. Now that's true in a concert hall as well. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but in the concert hall, in most concert halls, there are good seats and there are less good seats. In an outdoor performance of a piece like Inukssuit, there is no best seat in the house. The best seat in the house is wherever you happen to be at any particular moment. And it's all about changing perspective and following your ears and becoming physically involved in the act of listening.
Now, I'm just wondering, as you're describing this, I can't help but think of how this connects with the experience of indigenous cultures have with music, where they can seize the moment, sort of thing, and capture that music that happens right there at that point in time, at that space. And how you describe it reminds me of that experience, or that process, one could say. Now, you contrast that to the utilitarian world. We live in a society where we grew up with filters, trying to block that out.
Right.
And only because we need to, in order to get things done, in order to be in that momentum and stay focused and things like that. So would you say that, well, first of all, my question is, did indigenous cultures have any influence to this, I guess, creative direction in experiencing music for you?
Absolutely. You know, I've been fortunate to live with Native people in Alaska for much of my life. I've many good friends and neighbors who are Native people, and beyond that, I've been fortunate enough to travel all around rural Alaska, away from the roads, and to the villages and in the wilderness, and to experience a little bit of a very different way of life, and a very different way of being in the world. And you know, I spoke a few moments ago about this impulse to something like religious experience. I don't practice any religious discipline. My art, my music is my spiritual practice, if you will. But you know, when I grew up, I was confirmed in the Episcopal Church, and as a young man, I flirted with Zen Buddhism, and you know, there all these different influences and currents in spirituality and thought in various cultures. But I have to say that the tradition with which I feel the deepest affinity in some ways is or are the traditions of Alaska Native people. For instance, the Yupik people, the Inuit people of southwestern Alaska speak of Silam Inua, the inhabiting spirit of the universe. And there's this idea that everything in the world has spirit. They speak of the spirit in all things. And I think that's pretty close to my own aspirations and my own experience, and something that informs my work as a composer.
So spirituality, would you say, is a huge part of your process?
Yeah, but I don't talk about that normally. You know, it's not like say someone like Arvo Pärt who you know who's profoundly religious and has a particular religious tradition, and that's the core of who he is and what he does. I admire and respect that immensely. I don't really talk about these things very often. You know, I talk much more about biology or geography or you know, environmental concerns. So it's not an overtly or expressly religious aspiration, and yet, you know, why else would you do this with your life? It has to mean something big over the long haul. I mean, we don't make this. We don't devote ourselves to music to make money, or to be famous, or to attract love.
No, I would say that music is a human necessity. If you look at all the cultures, and I'm sure you agree with me, all cultures, all civilizations, even those that had never contact with one another, the one thing that they all have in common is music.
And there are often uncanny similarities within the music, even when there was apparently little or no historical contact. Yeah, there's certain things that seem to be essential, fundamental, and universal in a sense.
Well,
and I would argue that music is. I would agree with you that music is a fundamental human need.
It is a need. It's a social, and every culture has differing purposes, I find, for what music is for them. Some, for example, indigenous cultures, it's a social construct. It's also a spiritual construct. It's also used to provide spiritual healing with the shamans and the spiritual healers. With other cultures, it's also a means to maintain awareness of your own history, reinterpreting, re-exploring traditional values, much like the Eastern cultures. North America is a polyglot of things. There's commercial, there is classical, there's all sorts. If I were someone that's very new to new music, that's never heard new music, and I was to come to hear your music, how would you suggest I listen to a work of yours?
I would hope that the music will answer that question better than I can. That the music will tell you how to listen to it. And that doesn't always happen. But in a piece such as Inuksuit, again, the outdoor percussion piece, it's astonishing to me that people come to performances of that piece with little or no information or background or coaching or instruction on how to listen. And just through the process of following their ears and engaging with the wonder of all these sounds produced all around, they just understand very naturally how to enter into the piece, how to listen. In the concert hall, it's a little bit more of a challenge. For a piece like Become Ocean, I think it's a little bit more of a challenge because it's a contained, as we've discussed, it's this hermetically sealed environment, and also there are all these historical associations and ideas of how we listen in a concert hall. But I would just, years ago, I happened to be sitting between two dear friends of mine at a concert that included my music.
Yeah.
We were all in New York. We were all Alaskans, so they'd come to New York to surprise me. I was in New York for my 50th birthday, and they came and it was a surprise party. I had no idea my Alaskan buddies were in New York. It was wonderful. Yeah, and then there was this concert, and we went to the concert together. So I'm sitting between Gordon and Steve.
Yeah. And
Steve, sort of ribbing me, leans over, says to Gordon, Gordon, I don't always know how to listen to John's music. You got any advice for me? And I'm just sitting, in the middle. And Gordon said, well, look, just sit back and let it wash over you. And I thought that was great. We listened to the piece, and then after it was over, it was a lovely performance, a piece called Red Arc, Blue Veil. And after it was over, Steve leaned over again across me and said to Gordon, "You were right, Gordon. It was kind of like going through a car wash." So I think really, if I were to offer any advice, it would be just open up and listen to the sounds themselves. Just try to enter into the sound and let the sound enter you.
Well, actually, that's a very beautiful way of describing it. Because I admit, the first time I heard it was a bit of a challenge, only because it was my problem. I was, as you said, I went into it with a different value system, with different ears, with classical, new music ears, thinking I'm going to hear something really different, especially considering that it won the Pulitzer Prize.
Right.
And
so it's got this sort of seal of approval on it.
Exactly. And so, and if you look at the history of the winners of the Pulitzer Prize, there's a certain, I guess, standard or a certain way of listening to those works.
Yeah, kind of orthodoxy.
Oh, yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, got to brew the coffee.
Yeah.
Got to, get ready for, to experience this. And it wasn't what I expected. It was. Whoa. And then I realized, like halfway in, okay, I got to start over. Now that I know what it's all about, I have to switch gears here. Okay, no, okay, let me just relax. Let me just, like I'm meditating in a warm bath. Okay.
Thank you, and good for you, because I think it's even harder sometimes for a composer.
It is
to listen to music.
Well, it is. Well, no, it was harder for me. Had I just turned it on, not knowing what it was, it would probably have been easier. But I went into it with a certain degree of expectation, because I was thinking, oh, won the Pulitzer Prize. It's John Luther Adams. It's a big orchestra, 42 minutes. I was expecting that, I guess, super orchestral symphonic experience that's going to blow me away. But it was a different kind of experience where I had to, I can't do that with this kind of piece. I have to lose my sense of self. I have to let myself just flow with the sounds that's washing over me, and just take it in for wherever it takes me. And not only that, every time I hear it, I always pick up something different. It's a different meditative state each time. That day I had a little too much coffee, but if I were to listen to it sober, it would be a different experience. And I think I heard it again after a little shot of cognac, and again, a different experience. And so it's one of those pieces where you see different shades, you hear different shades. It puts you in different states of mind each and every time.
That's wonderful, Vincent. And for me, that's and I don't want to sound self-aggrandizing, because I feel I don't know where this piece came from. It didn't come from me. So there's no sense of ownership.
Really?
But to me, that's a hallmark of art. Whether it's literature or visual art or music, you can come back to it and discover something new each time. I've read Moby Dick 4 times.
And there's always something new.
It's a different experience every time.
Oh yeah, there are some books that do that. And some actually artistic experiences, like creations, that do that. Some, for example, Debussy, Beethoven for me, Mahler. Yeah, but if I can sit through the entire hour, but I know exactly what you're saying. But it's interesting to me that you say that it's not from you. Would you say that because you say it's through you, each time you come back to hearing this piece, it's a different experience? You find something different each time? Or?
Well, I hope so, and that's what I hope for you. And it seems as though that's your experience, and for any listener, as a composer, this is an occupational hazard. Sometimes we don't get to have the relationship with our music that other people get.
Right.
Because we know too much, we're too close to it.
That's exactly it.
It's difficult.
Right.
We're critiquing a performance, or you're thinking, that part of the piece should be a little different. You're always engaged with this critical mind.
You already know it too well. That you already have expectations in mind when you hear your own work. I know.
So. I think other listeners oftentimes get to enjoy our work more than we do. There are exceptions for me, and I keep coming back. I know I'm talking about Inuksut so much, but that piece, I actually enjoy attending performances of Inuksut because every performance is different, and because it's so big and it's so open that there's not any illusion that I could control or change
Right.
what's going on.
Mm.
It's just it becomes its own place, its own world, and so I can be like any other listener and just enjoy the experience.
I can see what you're saying, because with a work like that, each and every performance would be different. It would be a completely different set of rules, different set of circumstances, and you just have to submit yourself to whatever you're given.
And it's great. So there, again, there's that sense of wonder and curiosity of
Yeah.
what's going to happen next. What is that? I'm hearing something over here, but I can't see it. What?
Yeah.
You know, it's wonderful. In the concert hall, again, it's a little more difficult. But a piece like Become Ocean, I've heard Become Ocean exactly once.
Only once live.
Live.
You're
Yeah. I mean,
kidding.
obviously, I know the recording well because I was involved in producing it.
Whoa, so was it the premiere that you heard
No,
live?
no.
Carnegie Hall?
Carnegie Hall was the only performance I've heard.
You weren't even at the premiere.
Yesterday was the first time I've been involved in a rehearsal of the piece.
What? Okay, now this is interesting.
Well, it's not all that interesting. It was medical reasons, right?
Oh, I see.
I was just about to leave Alaska and go to Seattle for the rehearsals and the first performances.
Oh, I see.
And my retina detached.
Oh,
So instead I went to New York City and had emergency eye surgery.
I see.
And the day of the premiere, I was on the operating table.
Oh,
right?
gosh, I'm sorry.
And I showed up at Carnegie Hall and heard the piece for the first time, and I've only heard it live once.
Okay, well then that begs the question: how was it to finally hear it live? A year, 2 years after?
Yeah, it was well over a year afterwards. It was also my first experience inside Carnegie Hall.
You and me both. We both had actually had a piece on that week.
On the Spring for Music Festival.
Yeah, you were the night before
exactly.
the Symphony.
Yeah.
So we have something in common.
Yeah.
So anyways, come on.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful. But I have to say, it was a dream. But I have to say, what was even better was the first time I heard the piece on a recording, because I was in our friend's apartment in New York, face down. You know, following this retinal surgery, you have to have your face down for 10 days or so. It's awful. That's the worst part of it.
Yeah, I know about that.
So there I was, face down. You know, so hadn't slept very well for a week. And here came a FedEx with a CD recording of one of the first performances from Seattle. And we put it on, and I listened to it, and I just thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was so beautiful. And what was particularly unusual for me was that I heard it, and I thought, this is exactly the way I imagined this piece would sound.
Really?
And that rarely happens for me. I don't know about you, but a lot of times I write it down, as Morton Feldman said, I write it down in order to hear it. You know, and I'm sometimes surprised, sometimes excited, sometimes disappointed when I hear a piece for the first time. This piece sounded exactly like I imagined it would. And it wasn't only the piece, it was the performance also.
This is the live performance.
This is live performance from Seattle.
Yeah, wow.
And so it wasn't just the composition, it was the performance as well. It was just perfect.
Was that the first time you ever felt that? To feel that?
I don't know if it was the first time. It may have been. It was certainly the first time I've ever felt that with a piece on this scale. I mean, think about it. It's a 45-minute piece for a big orchestra. So I just couldn't believe it. So the point of this digression is that there's a way in which, when I had that experience, I thought, well, I'm just grateful. I didn't do this. This Become Ocean must have existed already somewhere, and I just happened to be able to tune into it and bring it into within hearing range. You know, there's a sense of the work composing me and just flowing
taking you
through.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Letting the music dictate its own will.
It told me exactly what it needed from me, and I sat down and took dictation.
Has this always been how you approached your creative process? Or
I don't think so. You know, I am, despite the sound of my music, I'm really an unreconstructed serialist.
wow.
And I love numbers, I love geometry, I love math,
Okay.
and I'm a formalist. But so was Mark Rothko. You know, Rothko would always say, people think I'm a colorist. I'm not, I'm a formalist. And you look at Rothko's sketches, his charcoal sketches or his pencil sketches for his paintings. And in black on white, you see those forms, and you realize, wow, there's composition here. You know, the way these shapes and weights and proportions are balanced is just exactly the way it needs to be. It's inevitable. And he would spend, he'd spend days getting his assistant to lower the canvas as they were stretching, to bring it down by an inch or two, or tuck it in, or bring it out. There was this obsession with form and scale and proportion and mathematical relationships. My music is full of those things, and has been since day one. Since I started composing in my teens. But I think over time, as I've worked out my various techniques, these things have become more intuitive, and I relax more about them, and I don't have to think about them anymore. They're just there, and that allows me then to just let things flow a little bit more and trust that that the tool will be there at the moment. The particular tool that I need at the moment will be there.
Completely understand. When I was young, I was all focused on trying to build technique, and that became the forefront. But after a while, when you get accustomed or just get a handle over it, it becomes second nature after a while. It's like a signature. You don't think about it. When you're young, you're constantly trying to work out.
Right.
But then after a while, you just
that's a beautiful way of putting it. When I teach from time to time, I find that young composers are they're so concerned about finding the notes, and particularly the pitches.
Right.
And it's not about that.
Actually, you raise something interesting I've been thinking about myself over time. I have a background minor in musicology, and one of the things that through the Winnipeg Symphony when I was their composer in residence, learned and researched is music of other cultures outside the Western tradition. And gradually I became more and more aware of how reliant, almost obsessive, the classical world is with text-based notation learning.
Right.
And especially when I was in school, it was all about how it looked on the page. As I was exploring outside that realm, I started to learn that it's not about what's on the page, especially cultures that are not text-based at all. It's about the experience of capturing that moment, that magic, where it just all makes sense. Where, as you say, the music flows through you.
My music looks like nothing on the page.
Really?
You look at it on the page, and I think Arvo Pärt has had this experience. People first look at some of his pieces and say, "Well, where's the music?" And my music has this very flat, unassuming, almost empty look on the page.
Well, that raises a very good question that I have for you then. When you have these ideas, these concepts, these musical structures or experiences, what are some of the challenges that you find trying to put that down on paper for classical musicians to interpret, especially for an orchestra?
Yeah, it's a special challenge with an orchestra because, among other things, it's a very big ensemble. Yeah. So you've got a lot of people with with a lot of different personalities and backgrounds and and interests, and you have to somehow find a way to get everybody to work together. So that's especially challenging. But it's also challenging in an orchestra because this is new music, and orchestras still don't play a lot of new music. And there's a matter of, what would you call it, performance practice.
Yeah, the performance or the performance tradition, I guess.
And there's no common practice these days, right? We're all doing different things, and some of us, you know, even with our one composer is exploring very different territories that require different approaches
so that's
to
what
performance.
You mean. Okay, yes.
Right? So it's not like another period in Western culture where everybody was kind of doing the same thing, and so they knew what to do. Like
the classical period where you had Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so now each piece, in a way, or each composer at least, is bringing a different performance practice. So that's tricky. I work on a regular basis with ensembles that are new music ensembles, as I'm sure you do. And this is what they do. This is why these ensembles exist. And they know how to do these things because they've done similar things in the past.
Right.
You take a piece like Become Ocean into an orchestra, and it may be that half the musicians in the orchestra have never seen anything like this. And if it has this kind of flat look on the page, you know, they don't know what to do or even how to regard it, and that's a challenge.
So that's one of the challenges of this, I guess, for a composer, especially for us living composers in this particular day and age, where our world is becoming more globalized. We have musicians and composers that are coming from so many different backgrounds, so many different influences, and so many different approaches, that for an orchestra, they're constantly trying to grasp with each piece with its own set of rules. It's not like the classical era where, well, you know what a sonata form is. There's certain rules, and you know that they understand. But now, that's a challenge, because as a composer, now you have to try and get them to understand what you're trying to do, to get them into your world as best you can. So I guess what I'm saying is the challenge that I'm gauging from what you're telling me is capturing that idea. Getting it on notation form is also just as hard, but then trying to get to that next step of getting the orchestra to understand. Right,
and conveying your that you know what you're doing and that you know what you want, but also that you're not trying. This is serious. You know, you're not trying to get away with something or pull anything over on anybody, and that you respect the musicians and what their talent, their skill, their generosity of spirit, their work. That you respect their work.
Here's a question.
But it's about something. It's not about, ultimately. It's not about the composer. It's not about the musicians. It's about the music. It's about this thing that's bigger than all of us that we're hoping to share.
Completely agree with you. But this raises a question, and it's a bigger question. I'm glad you mentioned about how hard it is to get new music on the orchestral programs. Do you find that there is a criteria that orchestras try to look for when programming new music?
Yeah, I don't. You know, I don't have a great deal of experience with orchestras, but my half-informed answer to that would be yes, and it all comes from economics, because I mean, with professional orchestras, you know, your time is limited, your rehearsal time is limited, and you're going to look for things that will be easy to rehearse, and oftentimes it's something you can put together in a short amount of time. Right. And often that dictates then that you'll perform pieces that deal with a kind of familiar idiom.
Something that they would understand.
We can make this sound, oh yeah, we know how to do this.
Right.
And then probably in addition there are, you know, concerns about audience and subscribers and how's this going to go, how are we going to squeeze the new work in between, you know, between the concerto and the symphony. So I think it tends, all these factors tend to favor shorter new works that that employ a more familiar gestural rhetoric.
Completely understand, yes.
And a piece like Become Ocean is big and long and requires, has some physical demands in terms of the setup that are unusual, and then it's this completely different sound world and performance practice. So
and
that's asking a lot. That's asking a lot.
I can tell.
But I'm not asking it. The music is asking it, so
I completely understand.
I'm happy when someone is up to the challenge, as they are here in Winnipeg.
Well, it helps that, I mean, this is purely from the programming standpoint, it helps that there's a work that won the Pulitzer Prize, because that's there's that marketing aspect. It's just something that people can understand, that the Pulitzer Prize has that name recognition.
Yes.
Also the fact that you're here. So people know that there's a living composer attending the performance. And so those two factors help. But I would agree that in the realities of the concert classical world, at least from what I've seen in the North America orchestral world, these things are important. How much time can they rehearse? Will it be too demanding on the musicians to comprehend? How will it translate to ticket sales, especially at number 3?
Yes.
And even if the conductor absolutely loves the work, absolutely is passionate about the work, those are still those 3 considerations that could veto whether the conductor wants to program it or not.
Yes.
And which is rather unfortunate. And I say that because I can't help but think how much that would impact the evolution of orchestral music of our day and age. Honestly, I mean,
absolutely.
So it's just something that I can't help but think. And after being the co-curator of the New Music Festival here for 6 years, over time I started to notice these things, and it's also kind of, I would say, impacted my writing in many ways. When I was young, I would write whatever and do whatever I can to make sure that the piece is a true representation of who I am.
Now, do you feel constrained when you're writing for
I
orchestra?
would say, well, fair question. That's a fair question. I would say I've gotten used to the restrictions that are given to me. If I was given a commission and I was told, okay, you only have 2 rehearsals, it's being sandwiched between Beethoven and a Rachmaninoff concerto. It's a masterworks, and so I have to think, okay, it's that kind of a crowd. You have to sell tickets. And my piece can no longer be 20 minutes. Then, if I was younger, I'd be like, I feel like a straitjacket. I'd be like, what am I supposed to do with this then? Now, after several years of being a composer, I've figured out how to do that while still retaining my voice. And I don't see it as a restriction anymore. I once did, but not anymore. Now I see it as a collaboration. I take a look at those parameters. I see, okay, so this is being programmed. It's on a Friday night, say, on, say January. Okay, so it's after Christmas holidays, so people are coming back, they're paying the bills and such. So I'll try to avoid any religious association. I'm just joking there. But I start to see these parameters and formulate a personality. And once I get a sense of this personality, I start to respond to it in musical terms. Well, okay, well, this is what I would hear. Much like how, as I was talking to another composer earlier this week, how I would talk to a person. When you talk to a person, different people will bring out different sides of you. Much like how we're talking, you bring out a different side of me in order to maintain this harmony. That is how I would see each commission, especially for an orchestra commission. If the Boston Pops commission me a piece, I look at that parameter and like, okay, this is what I start to hear. If the Ensemble Contemporain conducted by Boulez commissioned me, then switch gears, okay, this is what I'm starting to hear. And so that's where I start to think in terms of responding to the situation, not feeling constrained. But that may be because I've had years of experience working under so many different parameters.
Well, that's I mean, that's fascinating, and more power to you. I guess, you know, I've worked in relative isolation for most of my life, and there was not a lot of interest in what I was doing for many years. And as a result, I just did what I felt most compelled to do. And now I'm in my 60s, and I'm not going to change. Yeah, what was I doing in Alaska for 40 years? I'm kind of this, you know, misanthropic, you know, Alaskan guy. Like Popeye, I am what I am, right? You know, the New Yorker cartoon with Popeye sitting at the desk of the employment agency, and he's got his, you know, his big muscle with the anchor tattoo on his arm, and his Popeye and his pipe and his little sailor cap, and the guy sitting across the desk from him with a piece of paper, and he's saying, "I am what I am" is not much of a resume, Mr. Popeye. But I saying, I sort of have Popeye's resume, and at this point it's too late to change. So I just kind of do what I do, and I've been extremely fortunate. I would say I've been charmed, blessed to have relationships with certain ensembles, certain musicians, just the right people at the right moment who got what my work was about and believed in it and knew what to do with it better than I did. So I can't imagine. I can't imagine a more ideal situation for the birth of Become Ocean than I had with Seattle. In fact, I can't imagine that this piece would actually exist if it hadn't been for the Seattle Symphony. I mean, it wouldn't have been commissioned, you know, but it was beyond that. They came to me and they said, we want something big. What do you want to do? And I told them, and they said, okay. And Ludwig Morlot, the conductor, completely got what the piece was about and sold it to the musicians in the orchestra. I mean, there are musicians in the Seattle Symphony with whom I've worked before, members of the Seattle Chamber Players. There were people who already got it and believed in it. But you know, there was a lot of skepticism and head scratching and what is this? But the conductor believed in the piece. He was deeply invested in it. They rehearsed it adequately. They performed it multiple times. By the time they got to Carnegie Hall, you know, they owned that piece. Then they recorded it. So there was a sustained commitment to this relationship and this piece over the course of a couple of years. So often we have orchestra commissions or orchestra performances, and it's a one-off. You know, it's a hit and run. And that's very difficult for it's very difficult to really find the music and to develop the partnership. So I felt like this piece had a charmed birth.
Well, yeah, and you already had that. Well, this first of all, a champion who believed in you.
Yes.
And that really helps a lot.
Yes.
It's not because, say, you were just so-and-so, or because you represent so-and-so that fits a criteria or anything. It's because of who you are. There was somebody that actually thought in terms of creative integrity.
They had no idea what I would do. They just believed that I would do something interesting.
Now, you mentioned earlier, as you were talking about this, how you had lived a hermetic life for 40 years, but that was I got the sense that that was a blessing.
Absolutely.
It allowed you to do your own thing, not have to worry about...
It didn't always feel that way, believe me.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah. I think we all composers go through that. I want to raise that because this brings up an issue that keeps coming up throughout all my interviews with these composers. My first interview this week was with Georg Friedrich Haas. And it just occurred to me now that you two are the same age.
Yes.
And both had similar career experiences in the sense that You both lived hermetically
Yeah.
in a sense, and
Yeah.
you didn't gain international recognition until much later in life.
Yes.
Would you say, what, late 40s, 50s when you
Yeah,
started?
I would say it started to happen in my 50s.
Same thing with Georg.
Yes.
And he said that even though he was very open about it, even though it was a miserable period of trying to establish his career, it allowed him to stay in school that much longer. It allowed him to do his own thing
Right.
and develop. And so by the time he did get international recognition, like as yourself, he had that language that was very individual.
It's
It
his
was-
own. Yeah,
yeah.
There's nobody's music sounds like his.
Yeah, and would you say that's the same?
Yes,
thing for you? Yeah.
and maybe I'm even a more extreme case. We just met, Georg and I just met for the first time yesterday, and there's an instant kind of affinity.
Yeah.
I already knew his music. I admire it immensely, and now I've met him, and it's just, it's kind of love at first sight. But I didn't even go to graduate school. I dropped out of graduate school, went to Alaska. I mean, maybe in a sense even more an extreme case.
Right.
I never thought about career. In fact, I was kind of anti-career.
That is a very bold and, well, if I don't mind me saying, brave thing to do.
Well, it's
as a
nice
young
of you to
person.
say, but it wasn't. It
Okay.
really comes out of just my personality quirks, my sort of misanthropic.
Oh, so it's just who
It's
you
just
were.
who I was.
Huh.
I mean, maybe to some extent I knew what I was doing, but it didn't really feel that way. It was just every time I had the opportunity to make the right choice, I made the wrong choice. And in terms of where I was going to go to school, who I was going to study with, what prize I was going to enter, or where I was going to live, or all these things, what the kind of music I was going to write. I always made the wrong choice. And of course, that turned out in the long run to be the right path.
So what do you say when right now there's this ongoing discussion in the academic world that the most important thing is entrepreneurship, trying to get students to understand how to make that transition from graduating to the professional world. So what do you say about that?
Well, I don't know what to say without sounding like, again, a misanthropic old fart. I cringe when I hear that.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand, at some level I understand, we have to find a way to survive economically, and to help our music live and find its way into the open ears and open minds of people who may want to hear it. But music is not a profession. Music is an art. It is a life's work. It's a calling, and that is why we do this thing. If we wanted to have brilliant careers, we would go into business. And musicians, composers, I'm sure we could do very well in business. But that's not what we're doing with our lives.
Okay.
When I was in school, I was at Cal Arts I was in the first graduating class at the California Institute of the Arts. I had the supreme good fortune, the blessing to study with James Tenney. And who knows what would have become of me or my music had I not been struck by that lightning bolt. But we had no idea. No one told us that we could be composers. No one told us that we couldn't be composers. We never thought of how we were going to make our way in the world. Never thought about career, or I don't think I could even spell entrepreneurial. And I don't know. I get it, but the art has to come first.
So when you're talking about, when your experience was that you never thought about entrepreneur, you never thought of the profession, you just thought about the art. So what advice do you have for young composers today who are wrestling with the struggle between their art finding a profession, especially in this very, even more so, competitive, globalized world. It's becoming smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you have? What's advice do you have?
And there are even larger questions that I find many musicians, young composers, and performing musicians are asking me in conversations these days. And, you know, how does this matter? The world is melting. You know, our political systems are on the verge of bankruptcy. There's staggering economic inequality, environmental injustices all over the world. How can I do this with my life? I'm a smart person. I could go into law or politics or you know, maybe I should do something else. And there's no I don't have any answer that I think applies generally. I think each one of us just has to ask those questions and keep asking those questions throughout our lives. You know, why does this matter? Why does this matter to me, for me, and why does it matter for the world in which I live? Is this my best gift to a troubled world? And if you're asking those questions, then the answers will take care of themselves. You'll find you'll do the right thing, whatever it may be.
That is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
No, that is, because that the whole concept of career, the idea, the topic of career has come up many times. I've spoken to some composers who's had their careers established very early on, and like you and Georg, much later on.
I'm very happy that for me that it happened later.
That's that's exactly the universal theme. It seems like even those who, especially my colleagues who I've spoken to, who established their careers early on, they felt that it was too early. It was too early because now they don't feel they are able to take the same risks as they could have when they were younger. It was a period that, like all of us, we should have been taking risks. We should have risked failure, and not so much preoccupied of trying to get that next performance or trying not to get that, winning that prize or that opportunity.
Yes.
But when you're young, that's all you think about. It's you live in this sphere where you're bombarded by this notion of, oh, you need to have a career, you need to succeed, and that comes from the academic mindset where you have to have good grades, you have to achieve, and that trend that extends itself.
It becomes this kind of competitive careerism.
Yes, very much so. And if you're not competing with your colleague, you're competing with yourself.
Right.
And looking back, I was very fortunate in so many ways that even though I had many opportunities, it was also opportunities that was allowed me to take some risks. Granted, and not only that, I remember early on, back in 1999 when I started to win prizes, I started to get worried that I might be writing sequels of what got me the attention. And so I took, this is what I did, I kid you not, and I had a long talk with my mentor at the time, his name was Christos Hassis. If I wanted to go for the long run, I didn't want short-term success, I was in it for the long run. And so I took 4 years off from any commissions. I did not submit any of my works to any competitions. I did my doctorate at the University of Southern California. I studied with Stephen Harkey, and there I did everything I could to try everything out. Try to take bold leaps, go to uncharted territories. And my goodness, the number of times I failed, I won't forget. But those 4 years were the most pivotal.
That's great.
Years of my life, creatively speaking, because after that period, I got a sense I knew who I was in musical terms. It was almost as if I was going through a process of self-psychoanalysis in musical form, where I just locked myself away, just go through the process, just find myself, forget about whether it's going to win a prize, forget about if it's going to make so happy or if it's going to get me a good grade. Just do it.
More power to you.
Now that I have a family, I have bills to pay, though. But I'm just glad that I had those 4 years to experience that. And much like yourself and Georg, you had many years to be able to do that, where you didn't feel the pressures of the public watching over you. Or,
No, and I would periodically apply for this or that prize or residency or fellowship or whatever, and get turned down. And I look back at that. I mean, how many times did I apply for a Guggenheim Fellowship and get turned down? I stopped applying after the 5th or 6th. I just said, forget it. I look back at that and I think, boy, was I lucky. What if I'd gotten that?
Then, yeah, I know exactly what would have happened. Well, not exactly, but you would have this expectation suddenly placed upon you.
And then you get the next one and the next one, and now that I'm over 60 and I'm getting a little love and attention. It's wonderful. Please, I don't mean to sound in any way ungrateful or grouchy or disingenuous. I am loving that the music is finding people who want to hear it, who want to perform it. It's finding a life of its own, independent of the composer. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. I'm eating it up. But there's another way in which I'm not impressed.
Well,
I'm certainly not impressed with myself. Oh, I won the Pulitzer Prize. It's great, but it doesn't change anything.
I'm wondering, do you kind of miss that anonymity that you once had?
I think I need, for whatever reason, again, it gets back maybe to childhood or basic temperament or whatever. There's still, I'm this old, bald, gray-bearded guy.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to stop you right there. You don't look bad.
Okay, thank you.
You look great for 61.
Thank you. 62 now.
Oh, 62. Yeah, your birthday.
So no, but I feel like it's funny. I've got to get over this being the angry young man. that doesn't work anymore. But I think this new life that we're trying to establish, my wife and I, of being in the middle of it in New York, but still create a quiet place within New York, which I've been able to do. But then we have to have this other life, far away.
Well, that defined who you are.
That is who I am, and that can't change. So there's a little bit of a balancing act here that is new, but it seems to be working. I can do a certain kind of work in New York, but I can't do the foundation work.
I understand.
We were just down at our place in Mexico for a couple of months, and this big new piece just started to write itself the way that Become Ocean did. It just started.
Oh, I see.
And I'll tinker on it when we're in New York, but I can't wait to go back and just be there.
All right, this raises, and I'll try and finish off.
Please.
But this has been
this
very
is
interesting. First of all, this is interesting.
Oh, this is lovely.
I'm glad you're enjoying
Thank
this.
you.
Not a problem. You can buy me a drink later.
Okay.
Okay. This raises a good question, and this is something that I'm wrestling with myself, and as well as composers of my generation. Do you find that there is a difference between writing a piece for the commission as opposed to writing a piece just for yourself? And if there is a difference, what is meaningful?
That's a great question, and I don't really know. Suddenly, I'm getting commissions, and I'm saying no to some because, yes, because maybe I'm too busy, but also because that particular ensemble, that combination of instruments, it just doesn't speak to me, but really, I think I'm still trying to just do what the music wants of me. The music always comes first. The music always knows more than I do. It's about the music. It's not about me. So I try to pay attention to what the music wants and then take that and connect it with whatever opportunity may, to not react to an invitation or an opportunity but to turn it around and go in the other direction and say, okay, I want to do this. Now, who's interested in doing this?
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
I completely understand what you're saying. I know, I'm being honest. It's a difference between someone coming to you and say, we got this festival, it's this theme, can you write a piece that fits
Yeah, we need a
theme?
20-minute piece for this instrumentation. Yeah.
Whereas, say, for example, if I want to write a piano work, just for myself, I want to do something that's just for myself. Okay, then I'll send out a note and I'll say, hey, any of you pianists would be interested. This is what I have an idea for.
Right.
And I'll get some feedback, and some of them will say, yeah, let's try this. Okay, well, I'm going to need time to do this because I don't want to be one of those rush, 6 months and that's the deadline and then a performance.
Yeah.
No, I need some time. So would this be okay? And most times they'd be okay with that. And so I completely understand. And when you find that project that you're passionate about, that really speaks to you, the next step is to try and find that commission that will overlap with that.
Yes. Lou Harrison used to say, they're commissioned works, then there are works that you're compelled to write. The best is when the two coincide.
Well, have you ever had an experience where it's the other end of the extreme, where it was just the commission to fulfill that parameter?
I've never done that.
You never done that?
No.
All right.
Never done it. There occasionally have had the experience of someone will come to me and ask for a piece. In fact, I just had it. A festival in Scotland said they had performed my music a couple of years ago. They'd done Inuksawit, the big percussion piece, outdoors at this beautiful old estate in Scotland. They do this festival there. And they came to me and said, well, we're featuring a French horn soloist this year, and we want to bring in a bunch of horn players, and would you write us an outdoor piece for horns? And my initial thought was, I don't want to do that. And then I realized, yes, I do. Absolutely.
Oh.
Their idea was an idea that felt like mine. That doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
So I wrote them this 25-minute piece for natural horns.
Wow.
Scattered all over the landscape. I can't wait to hear it.
When's the premiere again, sir?
This summer.
That's
July
fantastic.
5th, I think it is.
Well, that must be very exciting.
Yeah.
See,
so that happens every now and then.
Because of those years of just crafting your voice, crafting what you do, people will know what they're going to get. They know what you represent.
Yeah,
and
Seattle knew that.
Yeah.
Seattle knew that.
So that's in some ways a luxury for a composer, to be able to have someone come to you and say, look, we love what you do. We get what you do. Here's a commission, and do whatever you want. We'll support it.
It's fantastic. And no one is calling me asking, no one is asking me to write an opera or a violin concerto or these things that, maybe I could think about, but probably not.
Oh, you wouldn't want to do that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. And I think people kind of get that.
Okay, no, I understand.
And so I don't. My feelings aren't hurt that I haven't been invited to compose an opera.
All right. Well, you're doing well for yourself, for what you're doing.
I'm having a great time.
Well, you're here in Winnipeg, New Music Festival. You're meeting with all these great artists.
Yeah.
You're eating it all.
It's a good life.